In the 1920s and 1930s, when archaeologists first began to excavate the royal graves at the city of Ur and other sites such as Tel Esmar and Kish and Susa, they began to discover the richness and wealth and the affluence of the Sumerian civilization and the Mesopotamian civilization. Also, around the same time, about 1,500 miles to the east, archaeologists also began to discover the Indus Valley Civilization. And it did not take long to find out that these civilizations, separated by so much distance, had contact with each other. And this became even clearer when other archaeological work began to find more sites in the space in between the Sumerian and the Indus Valley Civilization. So sites were discovered on the Iranian plateau, sites such as Tepe Sialk and Tepe Hisar, and also we began to discover sites on the Persian Gulf. Now, while scholars knew of contacts and exchange between people of the highlands and people of the land and the hinterland, it was this maritime trade which was the most interesting aspect of the discovery of these ancient civilizations. As we saw even in the transition from the Silk Road economy to the global oceanic economy in the 16th and 17th century, trade really allows you to scale up the interaction between different cultures and different axial cores. A similar maritime revolution happened in the 3rd millennium BC, which allowed the direct interaction of the Indus Valley people with the Mesopotamians. Remember, this interaction earlier was through relay trade, which was trade passed on from one settlement to the other, and some artifacts in fact took decades from the extraction to the final delivery or final use somewhere far away. But with the beginning of maritime trade, you had direct extraction and direct export and direct import, and in fact the developing of a global economy, even industry which was created especially for supplying the global market in a sense. From the artifacts and the historical record, we get the overall impression that the people of the Indus Valley were in fact primarily exporters of goods and perhaps even services. And the Mesopotamians, of course, they had this bustling city-state culture and high demand for luxury goods, were primarily importers of luxury commodities and perhaps even brought and settled some artisans in their cities to manufacture, especially beads, which the Indus Valley people specialized in. So just to give you an idea, in Mesopotamian texts, these are the objects they speak about as coming or imported from Meluha. So they speak about stone and pearls, stones such as lapis lazuli, pearls, carnelian beads. They speak about wood and plants, a wood known as Gis Abba Meluha, which is Meluha wood, some special kind of wood that came from Meluha. Another wood called the Mesu wood. They also imported fruit such as fresh dates. They imported animals, pets, birds and dogs. So there is a reference to a dog of Meluha and a cat of Meluha imported to one of the princely houses of Sumeria. And of course, there is a huge amount of copper and gold that came from Meluha. In fact, Meluha came to be identified with gold as a land which was rich in gold. And this myth, in fact, carried on throughout history. Even Herodotus and later Greek historians spoke of the greater Indus Valley region as a region which was very rich in gold. They also imported different manufactured objects. So a ship, in fact, was most likely imported from Meluha, at least the design of the ship. But also things like furniture and various artistic figurines were imported from Meluha. So Meluha was really sending these manufactured goods, not just raw commodities, to Mesopotamia. Now, we don't really find a lot of Mesopotamian material or Mesopotamian artifacts in the Indus Valley. In fact, in the entire Indus Valley region, and almost 1,500 sites have been excavated so far, we haven't found a single cuneiform tablet belonging to the Mesopotamian civilization. But we have found other hints and indications that there was some influence which flowed in the other direction as well. So for example, in this seal, you see the representation of a goddess holding two animals or two beasts apart. And this is very reminiscent of the Gilgamesh motif or the Gilgamesh seal, which originates in the Mesopotamian civilization. Similarly, at the site of Channu-Daro, which is not very far from Mohenjo-Daro, there is indication that there was some influence of Mesopotamian culture, and some Mesopotamian people might have lived in this site. Again, these are only hints. Now, Channu-Daro is an interesting site because it also gives us an indication that there were some Indo-European people living here, and living here before 2000 BC. Now, one great puzzle for archaeologists and also historians has always been whether the Indus Valley people had direct contacts with the Egyptian civilization. Now, of course, along this Arabian Sea to Persian Gulf coast, you have these old existing networks of localized maritime exchange. Remember, this was exchange through fishermen, which was integrated into this global or world scale maritime economy. In the Arabia Red Sea or Arabia Horn of Africa arc, trade there was most likely conducted through hybrid land and sea trade. So caravan trade passing till the coast of the Red Sea, and then localized trade through the intermediation of fishermen or fishing communities across the Red Sea. But again, there are some hints, these are only hints and will have to be proven through more archaeological excavation, especially in the Horn of Africa, that there was some contact by ancient Ethiopians, if we can call them that, and the people of the Indus Valley Civilization. I mentioned before that sorghum or grain from Africa had found its way into India, and this was cultivated even in the earliest years of the development of agriculture here. So perhaps these contacts existed and they can only be proven by more research. Now, in our understanding of world systems theory, cores by themselves cannot initialize this world systemic exchange. Cores need the intermediation of regions which are known as a semi-periphery. In this ancient world system, the role of the semi-periphery was played by Dilmun and Magan. Now, it is hypothesized that the first contact between the traders of the Indus Valley and the people of Magan and Dilmun was made by small fishermen in local exchange and trade. So this was not very different from the highlands or the hinterland trade which existed since earlier times. But what happened since 3000 BC was that this trade was formalized and controlled by these geo-economic powers or even empires. Now, this is another aspect of world systems theory. Generally, empires expand to control pre-existing trade networks. So empires expand to control these networks, which allow them to gather wealth and extract wealth from more and more spaces. And empires also compete with one another to try and gain control of spaces belonging to the other or controlled by the other. Perhaps we saw something similar happening in the Indus Valley Civilization. Remember, towards the end of my fourth lecture, I spoke about a potential conflict between the Harappan domain of the Indus Valley Civilization and the southern region of Sindh, which was controlled by the Koddijian people. So perhaps this was a contest which was geo-economic in nature for control of access to these trading networks. And once the Harappans expanded into the southern Sindh region and established this large city of Mohenjo-Daro on the banks of the Indus, which was then not very far away from the coast of the Arabian Sea, then they created that infrastructure which allowed them to control still further trade networks, which were these local trade networks of fishermen who were operating in the Arabian Sea. Similarly, there were contacts between the people of Dilmun or Bahrain and the people of Sumeria. But these are speculations. The important thing is to keep in mind that networks at localized scale exist. Once empires or civilizational scale polities integrate, they create infrastructure and they have power, and then they use that power to take control of these pre-existing networks and link them into vaster global scale or world systemic scale networks. This happened then, and it is relevant through history even till our times.